John Mara doesn't want to fire Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. We all agree with that, right?
Of course. Right.
He even said it a few weeks ago. That my intent. As of now, doesn't want to do it. If he ends up firing the head coach, it would be because he lost the locker room. It would be because they don't give constant effort. It would be because they somehow managed to have a 2-15 season. I don't think John Mara is going to say to himself, that's Joe Schoen. I think he's going to say to himself, that's the coach. This team isn't giving effort because of the coach. This team only won 2 games because of the coach. So when I see video of Joe Schoen at Shedeur Sanders' practice the other day, I do believe that the general manager is going to draft a quarterback next year. I think he's safe as hell, and I think we've all made an assumption, and I think it's been an incorrect assumption, that they are a package deal because they came here together.
Yes.
Well, I got news for you.
The relationship that they had prior.
And yes, they have a great relationship, but I can give you examples of other quote-unquote package deals or 2 guys that have great relationships where there ends up becoming a divorce. And so I really think that Brian Daboll, yes, is on a hot seat and the Giants need to perform better. I don't think that's the case at all with Joe Schoen.
It's interesting because, you know, when you look at this roster, there's been some good draft picks. I think there's been some addressing of what was absolutely needed, and that, talking obviously about the offensive line with Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon. They demonstratively got better at the offensive line. And you look at the staff and how they've helped things evolve. And Tyrone Tracy is a perfect example. Malik Neighbors looks like he's going to be a star. And so you're right about Joe Schoen, quote unquote, doing his job, the good job. Brian Daboll has it a little bit tougher because he took over the play calling, and for the early part of the season, it was like he was relearning how to call plays. And then he has to make the tough decisions, including moving on from Daniel Jones. And I'm sure it's in consultation with Joe Schoen and the owner, John Mara. But I also feel like Dabes is kind of playing with like half a hand tied behind his back. It's a different evaluation. Bringing in great players, it's one thing. Getting them all to play together, that's the job of the head coach. And so Dabes is, I don't know, he's in a tough spot because he knows he doesn't have a full, strong, compete with the Eagles or whoever roster right now. And he's trying to do his best, but the decisions are making guys start to tune out a little bit.
And that's on him, though.
It is, but it's also on the circumstances that you find yourself in. And so where do you place blame? I think that becomes a hard evaluation when you're looking at the head coach. And basically, the only thing that matters here is that they're losing football games.
Absolutely, but I think with a general manager, it is very difficult to make a firm judgment on them after 3 years. I think with a head coach, you can. I've sat here many a times after a year or 2 years, or in this case, 3 years, and we've made the right declaration on a head coach.
Yeah,
I think with a general manager, it's a lot more complicated, and I think Joe Schoen's track record, well, I'm not going to give him an A. It's not an F. It's not even a D. He's not John Idzik. Like, I look at these 3 drafts, even the latest draft. I mean, the latest draft is Malik Neighbors, who has looked like the best of the 3 young wide receivers that were taken early, despite some of his comments that comes out after games and the frustration he's shown. The 3rd-round pick of Drew Phillips looks like a steal.
Yep.
Theo Johnson as a 4th-round pick doesn't look awful. And Tyrone Tracy as a 5th-round pick looks like the steal of the draft.
Right, and Nubin's played 100% of the defensive snaps.
Right, so how would you grade that draft? I think most of us would say, well, that was actually really good.
I think it's an A.
Oh, it's an A. Okay.
Without a doubt.
So I ask you this, Giant fans. You want to fire a general manager after an A draft?
I don't, but I also understand the case. We could paint the rosy picture here about Joe Schoen.
I'm not painting the rosy picture. I'm being fair that if Daboll coaches his way out of his job, it's Brian Daboll, not Joe Schoen.
Right. I think, though, if you really polled Giants fans, and I guess we will at 888-808-1019, that Brian Daboll's done a better job than Joe Schoen has here in the last 3 years. Yes, because let's be honest, and I don't think...
In year 1, yes. I'll give you that. In year 2 and year 3.
That 2023 draft looks horrendous right now.
I agree, but I would also say in year 2, Dabes coached his ass off. I mean, they were in a lot of those games. We've talked about this many times. I mean, they easily could have won 9 games last year if it wasn't for 1 or 2 plays at the end of a bunch of those games. And so he was coaching his butt off. This is the first year where it's felt like things are getting off of a path, right? He's got a specific direction that he wants this team to go on and walk down, play down, talk down. You know, when you had the post-game press conferences and stuff, and this is the first really not even year, just few weeks where it's felt like guys are drifting off of that path.
I agree with that part, yeah.
And so is that enough to fire a guy?
No, but I don't think it's enough to fire both of them. I think if this team finishes 2-15 and the quit that we felt like we saw on Sunday continues, then it's going to be tough to argue him keeping his job. But I don't think that necessarily means Joe Schoen has to lose his job.
No, but if they finish 2-15, and whether Brian Daboll loses the locker room or not, Joe Schoen has not accumulated enough really good players here. And many will point to Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas still being the two best players, and they were not brought in by Joe Schoen. Although he came to, and I think, very underrated, really valuable deals with them, that they're not the highest paid players at the position, which is part of being a GM. There needs to be more substance here. And now it looks like they're trending that way after this past draft, but those first two off seasons arguably have continued to set the Giants back here.
I understand, but the only way, and this is one thing I think most of us have agreed on concerning the future of this head coach, would be if they quit.
Yes.
If there's a quit factor that we didn't see last year, that we hadn't even seen this year until Sunday. If that happens and he loses the locker room, the discussion changes.
Yeah.
I've said for a while he couldn't survive 2-15. So if we agree on that, do you think that should also cost Joe Schoen his job? To me, it's more kind of describing the head coach than it would be the general manager, who actually had a pretty good recent draft. It's not to defend everything he did, because you're right. Like, his overall 3-year tenure here, if we're grading it, is what, a C? I don't think it's enough to get fired. I don't think it's enough to get a contract extension necessarily, but I don't think they have to be considered a package deal, nor do I think they are. Because honestly, if they go 2-15 and this team quits, and John Mara and ownership has to make a decision about the future, and Brian Daboll's in a room with his feet up, like we saw during Hard Knocks, and Mr. Mara says, the team quit on you. Please explain yourself.
Yeah.
And he can't give a good explanation. I don't think that means Joe Schoen's got to go with him. And that's the thing I think most people are missing. They think it's a package deal. I don't believe it is. They could be the closest friends in the world. I don't think it's a package deal.
Now, he brought in Brian Daboll after their working relationship in Buffalo, and we all loved the synergy. That was part of what we were sold on, the synergy.
Yeah.
So if you are going to fire Brian Daboll and he loses the locker room, are we really trusting Joe Schoen to now hire a head coach that he didn't come with somebody who's comfortable with, like he did in Buffalo? Like, that would scare me to death, as opposed to just doing a full clean slate thing. And again, I want both to stay, but if you're telling me Dabes is going to go, I'm not so sure I could plant my flag and say keep with Schoen here.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest evaluating factor will be, are these guys getting better? Right? So when you look at year over year, are players getting better? And it's almost really hard this year because there's so many new players.
Right.
Think about the offensive line. It's a new offensive line coach. It's a new somewhat of a different blocking scheme. Most of these things are all the same things when you're talking pass protection or even run blocking with the duos and inside zones and all that stuff. But it's a new staff and there's new players. So when you're saying, all right, well, did they get better? I guess Evan Neal did a little bit. Right?
I couldn't get worse.
But you know what I mean? It's like, what are we actually talking about? Did the receiving core get better? Yeah, I think Wan'Dale's had a really good season. And so you can look at the quarterback situation, probably not, but like that's impossible to evaluate the quarterback. So the main factor when you're looking at a head coach is, are my players getting better? One, it's are they listening, the whole locker room stuff. But forget all of that. What matters is, on the field, are my players getting better, taking a step towards being one of the best units in the game? And if the answer is no, they're getting worse, then you start thinking about moving on.
Try to answer the question and answer your own question, because it's a good one. And you're right, it's tough because you have so many young players like Tyrone Tracy and Tyler Nubin and things like that.
Yes,
I think. How do you answer that for Brian Daboll?
Well, I would say there's a lot of guys that are really damn good. Tyrone Tracy's leading all rookie running backs. He was the 14th running back taken in this draft.
Right.
He's leading all rookie running backs in rushing yards. Malik Neighbors has the most pass receptions in 9 games, because he missed 2, right? They played 11. So in 9 games, and almost any young wide receiver, save Puka Nacua a year ago. And so, like, these guys are Theo Johnson, I think, is contributing more as a tight end than we've seen tight ends contribute in this offense in 3 or 4 years. And so, are they better? Yes, they are, but they're not winning. And so when you're not winning, it just creates this massive question mark that goes over every bit of positive that you could point to.
Yeah, I think that we all looked at this season, and maybe to varying degrees, because there weren't Super Bowl expectations for this team. I wouldn't even say there were playoff expectations.
I would agree with that.
When we went around the room before the season, forget Loogie, he was crazy. He had them winning 11 games. The rest of us were kind of in that 7, 8, 9 win range.
Yes.
Good, decent, maybe in a playoff race. They're obviously going to fall well short of that. And I think coming into this season, none of us realistically thought this was a hot seat year for this administration. What's made it a hot seat year is how badly things have looked. The fact that they're 2-9. The fact that there was a quick look to this team on Sunday. The hot seat was created. And by the way, ignore the dumb questions from 2 weeks into the season, because that's not what I'm referring to. To me and you, I think we were in lockstep. He's not on a hot seat. He never was.
No, but didn't feel like it.
I never thought he was, and I don't think he was. But what I always warned was, you can get yourself on the hot seat. Things can happen that change that real quick. And to me, that's what happened. They lost a lot of games. Certainly, you're right, Tiki. A lot of them were close. And then they had the exclamation point on Sunday. A very, very bad look with the comments coming out. To me, that's a coach that put himself on the hot seat. I don't think that's happened with the general manager. And I don't know if Giant fans are computing this because it's just been rinse and repeat. It's everybody would go. They're a package deal. I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe that because I'm using logic. I'm using the logic of imagining John Mara after this season is over saying, okay, I want to do a thorough look at my roster. Brian Daboll, why'd they quit on you? Answer the question. And it's tough to answer that if that's how this plays out. That's almost impossible to answer. And then Joe Schoen goes in there and says, my draft looks pretty damn good. And if I'm John Mara, who doesn't want to make changes, I wouldn't want to make changes either.
Right.
I don't want to fire coaches every couple of years.
He's done it too many times in the last 7 years.
Exactly. So what
or 8 years, I should say.
So what do? You say, we got to get rid of the coach. But, Joe, I believe in you. And I think that Giant fans need to start realizing that is a possibility that we're sitting here on January 6th, 7th, and 8th, and we're talking about Joe Schoen hiring a brand new head coach. That's a reality that I don't think enough people are realizing is absolutely on the table. And if things don't turn around tomorrow in Dallas, I think that's the likeliest scenario we're all staring at. And I can see it by your face, Sean. You don't like that scenario.
Well, I guess the answer would be if they're not going to do that, what is next? And I think that scares me. I don't want to hold on to Joe Schoen because I'm scared of, and I'm going to say it, Bill Belichick coming in here as the executive running the show, because that would, to me, derail this franchise. It's not the worst thing in the world. To me, though, the whole appeal of this regime is Brian Daboll coaching. So if I'm getting Daboll out, to me, Daboll's done more to warrant keeping his job than Schoen, and I think that's a weird way to split the baby here is to keep Schoen to me. I'd rather just a full new regime. Let's go.
Well, neither guy's really warranted it. You just want to see Daboll develop a young quarterback. You feel like the promise of Daboll, turning someone into the next Josh Allen, you have more confidence in that, and Joe Schoen drafting the next quarterback. Because that's what's happening. Joe Schoen's going to draft, in theory, the savior of the team.
And also hire the next head coach that you hope is the savior of the team.
Yeah, and he better be. This whole thing, does anything suck the excitement of having a number one pick more than this? I don't want to have to worry about the head coach and GM. I just want to focus on the quarterback.
I think you're nailing it, Sean. That's the problem. Is it starting over again just feels so daunting.
Yeah.
It's getting your energy behind, trying to find the belief in whoever is next if you're going to fire your head coach.
The new GM is going to operate a draft in which his scouts, field scouts are there.
Let's assume that Evan's right and you keep Joe Schoen. It's insignificant because what matters is how you coach whoever you have, right? You can have a bad team. A GM can put together not superior talent, but you have a great coach who's fantastic at taking the strengths of all the guys, all the pieces, and putting together a winner. We've seen that happen before. And so I think it's less about the GM to me. It's more about the coach. And starting over at a coach spot is so much harder than starting over at the GM spot. Right? I know the philosophy changed and the overarching plan is different if you bring in a new GM, but to me it's about guys in a locker room, guys on a field, how are they functioning, and do they get what they're being asked to do?
You know why I thought, and correct me on this, because you have more experience, I thought it would be tougher to start over with a GM than a head coach. The exact opposite of what you said.
No,
Can I give you my reasoning and then tell me where I'm wrong?
Go ahead.
Because I assume if you start over with a new GM, you're changing so much in that front office that we don't even realize. You're changing scouts. You're changing so much that kind of turnover almost takes over a year to really say it play out as opposed to a coach.
Well, this is true, but a lot of organizations have their scouts that they love, and they're going to be there for a long time, right? It's almost an owner, organizational employee, as opposed to, the GM wants this guy, this specific guy. And so you're right to an extent, but to me, the biggest challenge in any team is finding the right coach.
Well, I think Giant fans have to start to come to grips with something. In an ideal world, there wouldn't be changes. They show fight. They show heart. Dare I say they beat Dallas on Thanksgiving, and Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen have earned their way back. But I think it is more likely than not that they're both not gone, but Schoen is here and Daboll is gone. It's not the package deal we've all repeated and assumed. We'll get to your calls next, 888-808-1019. We'll make our NFL picks for this weekend coming up a little bit later on at 5:45. I will calm Met and Yankee fans down why Blake Snell to the Los Angeles Dodgers is not scary at all. And we'll get a medical update on Tommy DeVito coming up. But your calls next, 888-808-1019.